Now, Tamara Tarashuk Rona is a senior Americas researcher at Human Rights Watch, and she joins us via Skype from Buenos Aires in Argentina. Tamara, thank you so much for joining us. Now, Venezuela's opposition will hold a protest rally tomorrow to coincide with the expected inauguration of the new assembly that will rewrite the constitution. Do you fear more intimidation by Maduro's government?
That would happen is very big. In Venezuela, we've seen massive peaceful protests from the opposition and civil society for a long time now, and the reaction by security forces has been a brutal crackdown. So the situation tomorrow can be very dangerous.
Now, the firm that provided Venezuela's election technology for Sunday's controversial polls for a new constitutional assembly, has there been any response from the government after their statement?
No, and this has been out there even before. I mean, the confirmation by this firm that the vote was manipulated is very important, but there has been information even before the official countdown was given saying that it was impossible that so many people had voted. The images of the voting centers were images of places where there weren't as many people, and there's an official document that said that 3.7 million people had voted by 3:30 p.m. So it's very difficult that in the last hour and a half they would have such a large spike in terms of numbers. So there hasn't been an official reaction. The government has stuck to their numbers, which are very, very difficult to believe.
Now, why do you think that company, Smartmatic, has come out to state these facts with regards to the voting, the polls that took place on Sunday?
Well, I don't know why they did it, but I'm glad they did it to be able to know exactly what happened on Sunday. The vote for the Constituent Assembly never should have happened. It was a sham. The fact that the government is trying to impose a dictatorship through that Constituent Assembly is bad enough, and doing it through a voting system that is completely unreliable and without any external oversight and without even letting the media get close to the centers. There were a lot of doubts of what had happened. So this statement is a confirmation that we can't trust at all what the government says happened on Sunday, which is part of the problem. The big problem today is what's going to happen once that Constituent Assembly takes office tomorrow. And the risks are huge because the way it's been conceived is a Constituent Assembly that will have very vague powers to do things like suspending indefinitely elections or erasing from the National Assembly, which is Venezuela's legislature, or removing the Attorney General, who has become critical of the government in recent weeks.
Now, for 4 months of street demonstrations since April against Maduro have left more than 120 people dead. That's including 10 people over the weekend. Has Human Rights Watch started with investigations?
The brutality with which security forces have responded to demonstrations is tremendous. We are talking about more than 120 deaths, and according to the Attorney General's office, more than half of these were either caused by security forces or by armed pro-government gangs that operate with total impunity and hand-in-hand with security forces. But in addition to the deaths, there has been a brutal crackdown that included firing munitions at point-blank range against protesters. They've arrested hundreds of demonstrators, bystanders, opponents on the streets. They've taken more than 460 civilians to military courts in which they are prosecuted for crimes like rebellion or treason inside military installations in front of armed guards. So it's not just the deaths which are bad enough, but it's a context of absolute brutality to repress dissent.
Now, the international community has also criticized the ongoing detention of protest leader Leopoldo Lopez and Caracas Mayor Antonio Ledesma. Now, do we have reports of their condition while incarcerated, and the reasons of them being re-incarcerated? Are valid reasons?
They are not. And they shouldn't have been prosecuted in the first place because there is absolutely no evidence that they have committed crimes. They are both political prisoners who are in prison and were prosecuted and charged based on politically motivated charges. And they were both authorized house arrest under conditions that are completely impossible to understand in a democratic system. They were both told that they could not speak to the media and that they could not make public political statements. And they both criticized the Constituent Assembly, Maduro's abusive policies. And after they were detained in the middle of the night, the government, through the Supreme Court, which is basically an appendix of the executive, they said that the reason for their reincarceration was that they had violated the conditions for their house arrest, which are these ridiculous restrictions to talk to the media and to give their opinions, which are in and of themselves a violation of free speech. They also said that they had intelligence information that they were going to flee, but as everything in Venezuela, they provided no evidence at all to substantiate that claim.
Now, with regards to, let's shift focus and move on to the issue of reports of abuse of the media being one of the issues that Human Rights Watch has been dealing with. What would you say are the main challenges facing Venezuela at this point in time?
Well, there are different problems. The first is that after many, many years in which the government has gone after critical media outlets. In Venezuela today, you do not have a TV station with a national reach that is not on cable that actually shows the people what is happening in the country. And so you have a very limited amount of information in TVs and radios for the people to actually know what's happening due to censorship and sanctions against media outlets. The other problem is the difficulty that journalists have to cover the repression and the protests. They do that at a lot of risk because security agents do not respect when they are wearing their press vests or their signs. They've been attacked by security forces. They've been detained, including foreign journalists who were detained, while they were covering protests. Some of them when they were leaving the country after they had done their job. Others, when they were just standing, there was a BBC crew that was detained while they were filming close to the Ramos de military prison, which is where Leopoldo Lopez was being held at the time. They were just doing an interview with her mother in front of the prison, and they were all detained. Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult to document what's happening, and that's given a very, very important role to social media.
Now, Tamara, let's speak about the issue when Venezuelan President Maduro came out and said that, mocking U.S. President Donald Trump as an emperor. Has he made his argument clear? And how is this likely going to affect relations between the U.S. and Venezuela? And also, can you just touch on relations between Venezuela and its neighboring countries?
Yes, well, the relationship between Venezuela and the U.S. government has been very complicated for a long time. And traditionally, the Venezuelan government, previously under Chavez and now under Maduro, has usually criticized the U.S. president, whoever it was at the moment. And every attempt by the U.S. government to criticize the situation in Venezuela is considered an attack on Venezuelan sovereignty, and they always play the sovereignty card and say that they're, being subject to a foreign intervention, always led by the United States. And that is an argument, it's a card that you can't play at this point. When you have a government that's violating the most basic rights of its citizens, you cannot shield from criticism and consequences just by saying that you have a right to sovereignty. And that's become clearer and clearer over the past months when the region has reacted to Maduro's dictatorial practices. It's not just the U.S. government that is criticizing Maduro now. There is an outcry in the region of many key democratic leaders who have criticized the Constituent Assembly, saying that they won't recognize it, criticized the abuse, called for the release of political prisoners. So all this rhetoric between the U.S. and Venezuela and U.S. imperialism and invasions on the country loses ground when you see that it's not just a U.S. thing, it's a regional concern. and it's the region that's pushing Maduro to deal with this crisis.
And now, what about the neighbors, the immediate neighbors with regards to, you're saying that it's the region that's pushing Maduro to deal with the situation and the issues within Venezuela, but the reaction from the neighbors in terms of exactly what's happening, because this is also definitely affecting them with people probably coming through into their countries and trying to flee the violence and the protest and action that's taking place within their country.
Well, I've interviewed many people in different countries in Latin America, and there are hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans who have fled the crisis, and they do so for all sorts of reasons. Some flee the political climate, some flee for, the humanitarian crisis. So it's definitely having an impact on not only the neighbors, because you see that very clearly in Colombia, and you see that in the north of Brazil, which shares a border with Venezuela. But you also see it in Peru or Uruguay or Argentina, people spending weeks to get to another country in a bus to be able to find a new life. So it's having an impact in terms of a huge spike in the numbers of Venezuelan immigrants to all these countries, which the region is trying to deal with. But it's also a matter, you have these countries like Colombia and Brazil, but also other countries in the region like Peru or Mexico or Argentina that don't share a border with Venezuela, but are still very actively pursuing diplomatic and other channels to push the Maduro administration to restore democracy in the country.
Tamara, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Human Rights Watch Senior Americas researcher Tamara Turchik Berner joining us via Skype from Buenos Aires in Argentina.